Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's SS454 LS6. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the cooling of my 1971 Chevelle SS454. It obviously has a 454 big block Chevy, iron heads, iron block, about 9.5 to 1 compression. Last time I dynoed it, it made about 370 rear wheel horsepower. So it's not a very potent, it's pretty mild by today's standards. But the reason why we're going to look at this is because I recently went on a car cruise and the car overheated. Overheated kind of bad in my opinion. It got up to 240 degrees Fahrenheit. Now it didn't blow off or spew coolant everywhere or anything like that, but 240 degrees is getting dangerously hot in my opinion, especially since that's registered at the manifold and not at the head, which typically registers about 15 degrees hotter. So, I know you guys are going to have a couple questions. My timing I have set at 18 degrees initial. I've set that all the way up to 25 degrees. It doesn't seem to make a difference. I have my air-fuel ratio 13.5 to 14.5. Doesn't make a difference. 180 degree thermostat. I've ran 160. I modified this one currently right now that with little pinholes. Didn't make a difference. It just seems to run too hot at idle. So during the cruise, obviously I was idling around less than 5 miles an hour. There's no airflow. What's interesting though, and before I get to that actually, during that day it was only about 24-25 degrees Celsius, which is about 75-77 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's not that hot. It's definitely not Texas hot, that's for sure. And so 240 degrees idling around. I immediately went onto the highway, which had about 100 kilometers an hour, 62 miles an hour. The temperatures dropped to 164 degrees Fahrenheit pretty quickly too. So that's 76 degrees swing in temperature, which is ridiculous. So obviously there's airflow when I'm moving along at a decent speed. You know, even at, just regular cruising around, I'll typically stay around 178, 180 degrees kind of thing. So once I have moving, there's airflow, but at idle, it's just not pulling, which suggests the fan isn't moving enough air. So let me show you what I have for a setup right now and what I plan to do to fix it. Okay, let me show you what's going on under the hood. First, ignore the fact that that coolant hose is kind of squished down there. That is not a problem when it's running. It does fill up just normally and the coolant flows properly, so that is not an issue. The radiator is an aluminum. I don't really know how many cores, but it is definitely not made for a Chevelle. As you can see, it is kind of small. It doesn't even fill the core support, but again, I don't believe that is an issue because when I'm driving around, it cools just fine. But it is definitely not correct. Also, the previous owner, you can see, cobbled this up and hacked it all together just to get the shroud onto it. But the shroud is not centered. That side of the shroud is, there's a bigger gap over there than there is on this side. I don't think that's a huge issue, but I'm wondering if maybe I can center it a little bit more. I might give it a try just to see. Other thing is the shroud is, there's a couple of gaps. I don't know if you can see that right there. Right, so you definitely want to try to seal those if you can. So I'm going to try to seal it up the best that I can do. We'll see if that does anything. The fan itself is not, as you can see, positioned ideally. So from what I've read is that you want the fan to be about 50% inside the engine bay and 50% inside the shroud, and at least 1 inch off the radiator. Now it is plenty off the radiator side, but it, as you can see, just saw, it is not, in far enough. So right now I have a 2-inch spacer, so I'm going to switch that over to a 1 inch and bring the fan in, and hopefully that makes it a better position. The fan itself is an 18-inch aluminum bladed fan. That there's really not a lot of curves to those fins, but I don't know if that makes a difference. But someone told me that I have the fan on backwards, that those notches right there, those little cutouts there, should be on the engine side. So if that's the case, well, maybe that's part of the problem too. So this might be kind of a part 1 of 2, because these little changes I'm going to make, if they don't make a difference, I might switch over to a clutch fan. Yeah, we'll see. But anyways, let's go to work on this and see if any of this makes an improvement. So the first thing I'm going to do is a paper test where I stick this piece of paper onto the radiator and see if the vacuum of the fan inside the engine bay will actually suck the paper to the radiator. As you can see, the paper definitely stuck to the radiator, which suggests that there is some airflow at least. It's not a counterclockwise fan. It's not blowing air the wrong direction. So I guess that's good news. But yeah, it's still a problem. So we'll continue to rip the rest of it apart and move on from there. Upon pulling off the fan and shroud, I discovered a few things. First, it looks like the fan was put on correctly. You can see right here it says front, and so this side was facing the front of the car towards the radiator, which as far as I can tell, that is correct. It also says 0694, so it looks like this was built in June of 1994. Also, if you can see this, you can see there is a very slight curvature to these fins. Not a lot, which means it's not going to scoop a whole lot of air, but I did confirm the rotation of the engine, so this, when it's rotating, is moving like so, and it is scooping the air and pulling it back. So that all appears to be correct. The shroud, I found, is 21 inches in diameter. Now, I don't know if that's correct to a stock 1971 or not. It looks to be, but as you can see, this thing has been hacked up to fit the original, or fit the radiator that's been put in. I hate when people put in just parts that you can find. There's a sticker on the radiator that says 1984, or sorry, 1983. I don't know if that's how old the radiator is. It probably isn't, but either way, man, why couldn't they put the correct parts on it? It just baffles me. Anyways, you can see this thing's all hacked up to fit it, which, if you notice in the top here, they actually drilled new holes so it can fit, the factory panel, right? And what that has done is it has basically made the shroud off-center. So there's a big gap on one side and a small gap on the other. So I'm going to try to move it back to here. I'm going to drill a new hole, basically that, in hopes I can center that better. Honestly, I should have a 19-inch fan, because right now there's 1.5 inches of a gap on each side, which is, I guess, too much. I was told or recommended that a 19-inch would be better, but I'm not going to be changing fans today. We're going to run with it. So I'm thinking if I can center this better, I'm hoping it'll be, an improvement. So I'll get to moving on that, and hopefully we can get the parts that we have to work a little better. Alright, I have modified the fan shroud. As you can see, I put some weather stripping on the edges here. I had to pull it in and out of the vehicle so I could know where to put those correctly, but all in hopes that this will now create a better seal and create more vacuum when the fan is pulling the air out. These bigger holes I had to patch with just some signboard. I just riveted it on. It's painted on the other side, so there and there. I did drill a new hole right up on the top, so the shroud will now be centered to the fan, hopefully a little better. I installed the 1-inch spacer right here. You can see the old 2-inch, so that again is the idea, is to bring it closer to the engine, and so the fan blades will be half in, half out. So yeah, now it's just a matter of putting it all back together and seeing if any of this works. Everything is now back together, and it's hard to show you. The shroud is definitely more centered around the fan, which is good. The fan is sticking out, or sticking towards the engine now 1 inch, so there's some fan blades showing, as you can see. The gaps that were there before are gone, the best that I could at least. And I made sure the coolant was topped up, which I'm running only about 25-33% coolant. The rest is just distilled water. So now it's just a matter of closing the hood and letting the engine idle, and let's see how hot it gets. So I've been letting this idle for quite a while now, the better part of 10 minutes at least, inside my garage, where the hood is quite close to the wall. And currently the Phytech is registering 204 degrees, which is not a Phytech sensor. This is a Napa sensor. Oh, 206. And the Dakota Digital sensor is registering 200 degrees. So it's still climbing, but dare I say it's not climbing nearly as fast as it used to. So as you can see, it's climbed up to 228. This is saying 214, but it's hot enough that I'm going to get moving along and get this cooled down, but it's still too hot. Well, it looks like there will be a part 2 to this video, as the modifications that we did didn't seem to do that much, and honestly I'm not that surprised. I did get out on the highway and it actually cools better. It cools way better during highway conditions and just driving around conditions. I barely got up to 170 degrees. On the highway it got to as low as 162. Mind you, it is 4 or 5 degrees cooler ambient right now, Celsius. But I do feel like it's cooling better when it's moving. But overall, even though the idle cooling didn't improve that much, I still don't consider this a failure. We learned a bit. We improved the efficiency of the overall package. We made it basically as good as I can get it. So the fan is orientated correctly. The shroud is sealed. It's centered. Pretty much we're learning that this fan is a piece of garbage. So it just doesn't move enough air at idle. So I need to look at getting a new fan. And currently my thought is a clutch fan. I'm sure everybody out there has their opinion on which is better. Flex fan, clutch fan, electric fan. And there's pros and cons to all of them. And I have my opinions on all of them. And I'll share those in the next video. But I'm kind of thinking clutch fan right now. But subscribe for the future video to see which way I go. But yeah, that's going to be the end of this video. A worthwhile test. It cost me like 20 bucks and a few hours worth of work, which would not even be that long if I wasn't filming this. But that's the way it goes. Live and learn, right? So if you guys like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and thanks for watching.